This video is sponsored by Crimson Manifesto and Knuckles OX. We resume back with our heroes, as characters mourn Bardock's loss, and reluctantly begin planning a way to make things right, using the guidance of the Dragon Balls, and the short time they have left for shattering their own limits in the next year. This varies a lot, from Muesli seeming the most depressed, and in a very Bardock-like manner, taking on a bit more of the blame for how things turned out than she's due. Maybe shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and what-ifs all run through her head. Perhaps she was just being too cynical as always. They've all certainly been in tough spots before, ones which put the entire planet in danger, and pushed its defenders to the brink, and they've gotten through them all, even with so many amongst their ranks not originally being fighters by trade. So why was this time so different? Was it just because Saiyans were the enemy, and the thought and trauma of our home being taken away again was that debilitating? Enough to make her betray Gine and Bardock, even though she thought she stopped being a powerless and scared bystander a long time ago. After waking up, and also in a very Bardock-like manner, screaming expletives to the sky due to their circumstances, Gine is certainly sad and torn up in her own right, but actually bounces back from things fairly well, showing her likeness to Goku, especially since she's so much more confident here, to the point that she prioritizes things pragmatically, as Bardock would try to on super dangerous missions, and so combats the drop in morale by encouraging Muesli after she explains herself, stating that Cerulean and Bardock made the right choice in the end. She wasn't thinking straight, and her panic may well have gotten more of them killed like Bardock feared. They just weren't ready to stand up to a threat like that. Besides, she hates to admit it, but right now, for one of the first times in her life, her Saiyan blood has made her kind of excited for the looming danger upon them, no matter how uncertain things are right now. The one thing she knows for sure is that she'll get a chance to stand up to Bardock's brother, that gang of his again, and the thought of that gets her all giddy, just as much as it scares or angers her. An admittedly strange mix of feelings she's sure only Kakarot and Raditz would really understand, but she still wishes to comfort the rest of their allies regardless. In fact, she insists that if they have to have a doom and gloomy strategy meeting, it may as well be somewhere comfortable and with good food. As taking the lead officially, she requests every one of their allies accompany her back to Mount Pawsey for dinner, hurrying them into the air with her, as the last ones there would of course have to set the table, help with cleaning up afterwards, as she has somehow even found the energy to cook again, which had originally been quelled after doing so while fighting at the same time in the Budokai just earlier in that very long day. Unknown to her at first, this sudden reinvigoration is because for an instant, this balance of her hysterically wrathful yet loving emotion sees her tap back into that strange power beyond the spirit of the Saiyans, which emerged when she grew enraged at Vegeta, maintaining it until it is pointed out to her in shock and awe by Muesli, who feels the change in her ki rather acutely, at which point Gine's own curiosity seems to make it fade away, just as mysteriously as it came. Shocked by this, and all the other things that have happened in only about 24 hours, Raditz is also hit pretty hard, but for multiple reasons, as he feels failure as not just a warrior, but as a son and big brother as well. He couldn't take on Nappa, and especially Vegeta on his own, even though it's all his fault they even came to the Earth. And because they wasted time with the small fries, his father had to give his all to cover for his weaknesses again, as he couldn't even protect Kakarot and the damn Moss Head. Thankfully, he has people like his grandpa, Mark, Mr. Satan, and Devilman cheering him on not to lose heart, as no matter what, they respect his bravery. Granolah feels much the same as his wild-haired rival, as if not for Goku the Hedgehog, he'd have been much worse off. And beyond that, due to Vegeta, his pride as a marksman has taken a critical hit. Thankfully, after intense and focused healing from a Naito, he's able to use and bandage his hands up enough to just barely function with them, in light of the fact that he refused to use the Senzu, knowing they will likely be in great need of them soon. It was a sacrifice he is willing to make, as it seems like the least of the challenges imposed on the training ahead of them. As for Goku, he is actually fairly distraught, in a way reminiscent of how Gohan would be, partially because no matter how Saiyan he has also been raised uniquely earthly, and this kind of certain world-ending pressure is fairly foreign to him, since the adults have always been able to stave it off when he and the youth weren't able to. However, he does feel those Saiyan emotions Gine was mentioning, and also much like his own son, it's nowhere in Goku to withdraw from the challenge, and so he is amongst the first to request some kind of special training method, obviously prepared to do whatever it takes in his boundless path to power, even asking Kami and Mr. Popo as the last to technically teach his father for whatever he can do to get stronger. In all honesty, they're not too sure what good the boy could get under them, outside of simply drinking the ultra divine water, as even if he were to start from the beginning through training with Korin, he'd surely complete it in a flash. His key sense and control are also soon to be vastly beyond even his as the Guardian of Earth, as goes for most of the heavy hitters amongst their ranks. And sadly, the potential unleashing water alone won't solve their problems, but they can't seem to find any solution which is that effective alone. Thus, it's suggested this be the training the earthly martial artists who make up the remaining of the Turtle, Crane, and Devil schools undertake, since while they've already surpassed the superhuman barrier, they've yet to necessarily climb the new heights Kami and the other attendants of Earth have reached, in the wake of Bardock and his family, arriving to change the entire concept they had of a power scale. And speaking of, Kami looks to Gine and Muesli to make the point that it may also serve them well to study the tactics and methods of the so-called Frieza Force organization the Saiyans and Crusher Corps stem from, as even if they are straightforward brute force-based ones, it'd be better to know than to be caught off guard, and there is a facility on the lookout which could help with that immensely. The Saiyan woman agrees to this, but in light of the weird power she drew from the spirit of the Saiyans, she's actually thinking about roughing it in the wilderness for most of the years of training, while a bit too quickly, almost as if she's intentionally looking for an excuse to distance herself from Gine and the rest of the family. Muesli volunteers to head this Saiyan simulation training up, as she is, after all, fairly experienced in being on the receiving end of a planet raid, and living on the lookout with Monaita was the original plan when she arrived on Earth anyway. In light of this distinction, and the levels and tiers of difficulties to their training, which will surely encourage and push the students to grow in an effort to reach the very clearly defined top. And as he's already completed training under the Cat Master, it's actually decided by Roshi that he will choose a proxy to serve as his acting master, like Shin and Spike have, through Tao and Satan, regardless of how willingly the decision was made in either case. The support of an older Grand Master figure to support the efforts and training of the school itself has drastically increased the effectiveness of their teachings, in a way the old glasses-clad hermit isn't willing to be left behind in. Thus, he'd like to get the aid of the Ox King in helping him to support the junior turtle students through this training, as that way he can at least spend some time training under God to improve as much as he can, in case his strength is needed in the coming conflict. Despite his desire to retire, still, he's certain the man will be up for the task, and even if he's not now, Gohan will be there to support him as well. The sentiment Devilman surprisingly echoes, as he cites that now that he's been through his hell, Mr. Satan should be up to snuff enough in order to focus on Mark and Raditz's training, as it's clear now he finally needs to take the Guardian up on his offer to be the devil trained by the Divine. To this end, Tao, having finished his own treatment as well, begrudgingly cites that if the old champions are planning to make a Grand Master's class, he's sure his brother would be quite jealous to not be invited, and besides, there's no money to be made for an assassin if everyone is dead, so he'll definitely be willing to lend his aid if Roshi and the others will have him. And in this circumstance, old grudges and petty wars between rival schools are easily set aside, even for those as set in their ways as the Turtle Hermit and Earth's Guardian, as they reply to Tao that this would mean a great deal to them both, and he'll be willing to humble himself like that for the greater good. This begins fairly active and effective strategizing, since this version of the Z Fighters is headed up by the cunning Bardock, and more importantly, is a lot more chock full of brainiacs, so the planning is calm, collected, and pretty coldly cunning in its own right, as the Z Fighters are very much raring to avenge the Earth and their fallen comrade, so they consider all options, from a supposed chamber which dilates time for those inside it, to Fortune Teller Baba's ability to grant a 24-hour pass to dead fighters, though ultimately, both are dismissed as non-viable for the sake that, according to Kami, Bardock apparently was granted an opportunity to try the Room of Spirit in time, but was only able to handle the mental strain of being inside it alone for 3 months. Any longer, and he may well have lost his mind. A story which daunts even some of the most fearless among them, as everyone has great respect for his fortitude and tenacity. So if he can't do it, while Baba on the other hand could be a good option for training, but an even better one for bolstering their forces when they really need it, since each spirit only gets a single pass, meaning the likes of Flake and Fasha couldn't lend their aid that way, for example. Thankfully, there are still options and time to spare, as by the description of how the Shinseiju functions, there will likely be other problems which will rise over the next year as the parasitic tree matures, which are sure to call for their attention, or else innocence may digest the Dragon Balls can undo. And speaking of very literal brainiacs, Dr. Willow has thankfully been spared like the others, but unfortunately his exosuit is in serious need of repairs, actually to the point that his tank has leaked out a dangerous amount of the new fluid his brain stays suspended in. Luckily though, quick thinking by Kami, the brain in question haven't shrunken a great deal since we met Dr. Willow, and the fact Willow can somewhat apply his ki through the only organ he has left rather than just through a mechanical body like Bardock taught him, make it so the vulnerable pirate can be safely transferred from his mech while it receives repairs and upgrades. Granted though, this transfers into a rice cooker, which the god had on standby, a method of rescue Piccolo eyes his counterpart unusually for, despite it being quite the safe little carrying case for the mostly self-sufficient brain. However, returning to the issue of the strategy ahead, the Demon King proclaims that he would like to take Son Goku with him under his wing for the year, as he's already completed God's training and has devised his own improved version of it. Besides, the boy is Bardock's child, and what they need now is not the gentleness of a guardian, but the ferocity of a demon, just like those Saiyans are always talking about. Surprisingly, Gine has no real qualms with this, as she gets the distinct feeling Bardock would actually highly approve of sticking the gentle Kakarot with a tougher teacher than he's ever had, though she makes it clear she'll be checking up on them from time to time. The Demon King of course agreeing, as by now, he understands Gine fairly well, and has even come to really respect her. As for Goku, he actually doesn't shy away from this training like Gohan would, even though he is still pretty torn up. If it hadn't been for this specific loss to Vegeta, which has fired him up more than any petty contest with Raditz or Granolah ever has, young Kakarot may have reacted to this sudden shift in seriousness and tenseness, and locked into his training just like Son Gohan would, as even though there haven't been any instances of his head being hit seriously in this story, and he still remembers and knows the ways and thoughts of a Saiyan, it's simply not the environment he was raised in, having barely taken a breath of air on planet Vegeta before he was whisked away to the safe and peaceful haven of Earth. As a result, he's prepared now to embrace at least part of that life he never knew by thinking like a soldier, as his father would say, promising his newly dubbed Master Piccolo that he will be disciplined and and diligent training, so he wants the Demon King of the evil realm to please hold nothing back in his teachings. Give him the terrifying strength of full power to help the youngest Saiyan martial artist get as strong as he possibly can before the year is out. In light of this, Raditz actually begins to consider whether he should try out training under Piccolo as well, as his power always has been pretty impressive, even amongst the Green Man, with their lack of transformation and high affinity for key manipulation and projection. It's actually a fighting style which can mesh pretty well with Saiyan warriors. And Devilman is rightfully focused on increasing his own power this next year. They are more than likely going to need the Devil Might Beam now more than ever. The Demon King is obviously the next best option, and if Granolah joins the mix, they could get better results from sparring as well. However, as this thought comes, so do two realizations. Number one, at some point during their flight from the lookout to Mount Paozu, Granolah and Muesli are suddenly nowhere to be seen, after the mint-haired mother mentioned her own intentions for the year. And number two, someone large was rather slowly making their way up the mountain to their home, shockingly revealed to be a swollen-jawed Nappa, once more adorned in his ki-suppressing cloak, and equipped with a new scouter, which he removes and bundles in the garment to muffle it. The act upon being seen is a form of waving the white flag. This surrender is nearly not accepted by many amongst the fighters, still holding a significant grudge, and feeling distrustful, like chiefly Tien and Chaozu for some reason. But beyond that, no one is happy with or to see the brutish Saiyan giant, outside of Raditz, who is simply confused why he'd be here if not for a fight, as they were even now in his eyes. However, the one thing he does know, thanks to having been with him for at least enough time to grow to hate him, is that someone who doles out violence simply for the love of the game like Nappa doesn't show mercy lightly, and that must mean he has his own ambitions aside from his orders. And so surprisingly, Raditz can see the last thing Nappa came here to do is hurt anyone, going so far as to talk everyone down, by now verbally proposing to the group his theory that Nappa actually helped him get away from the Crusher Corps in exchange for his sparing him earlier, which the bald Saiyan nods affirmative to, hence taking steps to make sure Vegeta and Turles aren't listening in. With this being the case, and not in the mood for charades, Raditz convinces Minato to heal the big Saiyan's jaw just enough for him to talk. Thanks to this, Nappa, Raditz, and the rest of the Z fighters are able to have a dialogue, in which the brute not only genuinely questions what happened to change the runt so much on this planet, but then reacts with shock when he receives Raditz's simply profound, yet embarrassed answer of having found something much grander than Prince Vegeta to put his pride as a Saiyan in. And that's about it. Finding that even if he doesn't understand them, he can at least respect these Saiyans. The former general confides in his ex-charge that this is why he's here. He has become extremely concerned for the prince, and believes that Turles, no matter how mighty he might be, and his addiction to that fruit, have only made Vegeta worse off. He's become all the more like those he used to hate, and now can't even take pride in the power of his royal lineage anymore for the love of the fruit. And due to this, Nappa has come to realize that if the prince becomes as beholden to the tree of might as Turles is, it'd be the ultimate failure in his assignment from King Vegeta, one he made the mistake of long before Turles appeared, by not trying hard to mold the prince into the leader he was meant to be. Even if the boy pushed back, since it's not like that stopped the space pirate from earning his respect, he was just too hard-headed and flippant to see it. Thus, he's come to ask the runt, or Raditz, to allow the mid-class warrior to train him like a proper Saiyan elite, as he was meant to for Vegeta, as something like that may be just the shock he needs to show the prince he doesn't need the fruit. And if not, then Raditz can use that power to help him put a stop to Vegeta before he's too far gone to the Shinseiju like Turles is. He can help them destroy the tree without dooming all their lives or this planet, but he can at least finally become a real teacher if they'll give him the chance. Quickly realizing this has become his choice, and thinking about the pros and cons carefully, Raditz looks a lot like his father to all assembled, as he carefully puts thought into things and weighs his options. But as said earlier about old grudges, there's little room for them now, aside from Kami and Piccolo's, and so Raditz actually accepts these conditions rather readily, without much more thought to the possible consequences should his training prove to not be enough, as one other certain thing that he's aware of is the desperate need to get stronger, so he's not too picky about where or who he grinds levels with. Meanwhile, at the future base of the Tree of Might, Gas waits patiently, yet diligently, after Nappa had seemingly wandered off. But actually, the Heater is appreciating the alone time, as it offers him a chance to call in with an update for Elic, so his brother doesn't have to wait on Turles and his admonishments to the story. However, in the middle of the call, and their greetings to one another, Gas is interrupted as Muesli approaches the tree sprout angrily, yelling that she wants to speak with the Heaters. Initially annoyed at the interruption, the youngest Heater is only further pissed off when Muesli continues brazenly approaching, even apparently without being able to see, clarifying that she wants him to let her speak with Elic, a demand he chooses to deny with great force, until he recognizes she is not alone, as Granolah appears and levels a finger gun to the back of his head, having approached completely without his notice, to just as brazenly in his own right enforce his mother's request, truly showing little interest in the blue alien in front of them, by now demanding to speak with the oldest brother. Gas obviously isn't happy about this, and with his free reign to kill from Turles, prepares to exercise it immediately, until Elic stops him bemusedly, quipping smugly that it appears the boy can be taken from the bounty hunting life, but you can't take the bounty hunter out of good old Granolah. And so for old time's sake, asks Gas to give Muesli his communicator, so they can have a word. The youngest Hida brother, again, isn't pleased, but complies, tossing the device to Muesli, who is forced to catch it with both hands, on account of no sight, while Gas keeps glaring at Granolah, now noticing the heavily bandaged state of his hands, and noting with a bit of amusement of his own that the kid was bluffing, as there's little chance he can shoot well right now. Muesli steps a bit out of earshot and centers herself, before uncovering the device in her grasp to release the hollow-casted visage of Elic, whom leers at her closer like some kind of merchandise, greeting her and introducing himself casually, as if he hadn't once blown a hole in her chest. The sleazy businessman eagerly questions to what reason he has the pleasure, and more importantly, how, as he's fairly certain he remembers her being quite dead. Muesli is, of course, angry in her own right, much like Gas had been, but used the opportunity to leverage the knowledge of the Dragon Balls, which Turles had abandoned, something she correctly assumes Elic has an immense interest in, as she even confidently ends up citing that they'll bring Bardock right back to life too, and she'll only let him in on the secret of how, in exchange for something in return. Curious about this deal, Elic more openly reveals his interest. However, when Muesli finishes that she wants to put a hit out on this Turles character for Gas to fulfill, the older brother makes a dry expression and flatly refuses, apologizing for the rudeness, but expresses that even if the info she's offering is how to bring back the dead, using family for killing off such a certifiably profitable business partner would be bad management on his part. Already suspecting that unfortunately for her, none of Elec's other contractors would stand a chance either. Muesli responds that there's no deal then. However, thinking quickly, Elic offers a consolation, stating that she can hire Gas to train them on the other hand. That stuffy old Kuzma Naito would never accept his offers to train up Granolah personally as one of his bounty hunters, even though it surely would have been better for the brat's development than shooting trees in the woods. So what does Mommy say? If they toughen up enough to take Turles out of their own, then they could surely make up for the loss, since Granolah still has a contract of his own to uphold. This still pisses Muesli off, which is at least a notable improvement from feeling cold, empty, and hollow, but it still makes her hate this heater all the more. But this deal is still absolutely better than nothing, and so making at least one more condition for herself. She cites that if Gas won't kill him, then he also has to abstain from entering the battle at all when Turles returns. A concession Elic easily makes, as he admits that his little brother was only there with the Crusher Corps as his spy and proxy, more so than to actually help out the Saiyan. Turles has never needed it after all. Meanwhile, a deep booming voice still calls out the name of Bardock, and the scarred Saiyan somehow or another hears it. He hears it so well in fact, that he realizes it says a bit more than just his name. In an almost cruelly taunting voice, he's told over and over that he must be dreaming if he thinks he can have its power for whatever he wants. He needs to wake up. Wake up, Bardock! These words said in a drastically different, yet somehow less familiar tone, finally do rouse the Saiyan from slumber. Though how this is possible when his last memory awake was the feeling of his body crumbling away as he poured out all his ki and life forces beyond him, as he looks up to find himself in what could only be described as some other world, sat in front of a massive office desk, while a giant horned ogre glares down at him suspiciously, and beside him stands none other than his friend Annette, alive in her own right. While pleased to see her whole and healthy, Bardock is still confused about what just happened, and is still happening, and more importantly, crass and conveying, as he asks what the hell's going on in a rather Saiyan-like manner, a point that Massive only tis to while jotting something down, jabbing the former alien conqueror in the ribs to get with the program while she buys time for Kami to get there, as he is pulled to his feet by Annette, who continues her efforts to advocate on Bardock's behalf, despite it seeming like a Sisyphusian task so far. Annette suddenly thanks who she calls King Yima for granting Bardock his body for her to prove her point, continuing on that as he can see, though this man shares the exact same visage and genetics as evil Saiyans, he is completely different, having fought for her sake as the lower deity of Earth twice now, and even given his life for the planet against his most recent threat, all after having even deserted the sinister organization he used to work for. Surely these accomplishments should offset his past misdeeds for the opportunity to keep his body permanently here in the other world, and train to become stronger with her after taking the challenge of Snake Way. However, cutting her off, the owner of the mahogany desk reminds that he's also still a Saiyan warrior, with a rep sheet that far exceeds his heroics in scale too. And the planet Earth is only in danger because of him and his family, is it not? Growing angry at having to repeat herself, Annette stresses that this is her point, and if he'll only grant Kami a bit more time to settle things on Earth, he'll surely come to cooperate things. Finally getting his bearings enough to see that there is of course a boring bureaucracy to rebel against in the afterlife as well. Bardock suddenly gets fed up with the back and forth. Oi. Quit with the pronoun game and fill me in on what's going on. How can I get some seriously intense training in? You guys sending me to hell or not? Self-satisfied, King Yima takes this admittance of knowing damnation as a means to dismiss this case in its entirety, correcting that it's called the Home for Infinite Losers, while moving to stamp a denial on the scarred Saiyan's form. Annette's eyes twitch with worry, as she now has to advocate to who she's advocating for, as she assures Bardock the training they'll receive after crossing the legendary winding road would be far more fitting for a grand hero like him him than a stint in hell. And more beneficial, they're talking about studying under a deity magnitudes higher than Kami and even King Yama here. But even so, Bardock is also a bit stubborn. After all, growing up on planet Vegeta, the endless battles, violence, and depravity of hell was something that Saiyan warriors took comfort in, and almost even looked forward to. So to Bardock, it's actually unfair that he's having his chance to see it taken away. While the Oni King, of course, doesn't like having the power difference between himself and one of his higher-ups emphasized. But just then, it seems the god of Earth, whom, mind you, he also isn't the biggest fan of, finally makes his way to the check-in station after achieving at least a fragile calm on his planet and forming some kind of strategy. As a result, to get King Yama back in a good mood, and to even grant them time to further hold up his line, Kami has to be a bit more of an obsequious brown-noser than Anin to face herself to. And on Bardock's behalf, as the man is a great deal, well, let's just say different than his child soul will be judged as in canon. However, this is a disgrace Bardock doesn't believe his friends should have to endure at all. And being in a rush as a very busy dead man himself, the crude Saiyan barks with a great deal of that iconic bad attitude, that the more time they waste, the more people are going to pile up in this stupid place, because of his brother and those damn trees. Hearing this, Yama stiffens, and actually pulls out his fine spectacles to read through Bardock's summary closer, specifically the family tree, before the branches which don't seem so rotten, then glancing down the room with him sourly, as Yama confirms the man in front of him is talking about Turles, the very Saiyan which somehow found himself in possession of, and to some, possessed by the mythical fruit of the Tree of Might. That scoundrel has been trying to give the dreaded Frieza a run for his money for years now. And mighty say, the man's self-proclaimed title as a destroyer of the universe is a blatant case of infringement, which is going to get him in deep trouble one of these days. Slowing himself down for a bit, Bardock asks him to go back to that part about Turles being possessed, snorting impatiently, as if he himself isn't helping to hold up the line now. Yama exposits that he doesn't mean to absolve the Saiyan of sin totally, but the inherently parasitic Shinseiju is an offshoot of a divine plant grown here in the other world by him. It's really nothing all that special compared to other divine or demonic plants, merely a tree which has the side effect of permanently increasing the power of the gods. In mortals, however, the power of effect is more fleeting than the nourishment derived from the act of eating, but the Tree of Might fruit works the exact opposite way. Some theorize it may have originated from the demon realm, and as such, the tree may have a slight will of its own to be tended to and spread by the strongest and most evil heart it can find. Hence King Yama's surprise. There's a fairly special place in hell for someone like Turles, even amongst Saiyans. If Bardock or Bruce Chun or Bryce Liu, whoever he wants to call himself, wants a chance to stop that maniac, then have at it, since that's just about the only way he can barely label the Saiyan as heroic enough to train with King Kai. Seeing their group finally pointing to Snake Way, amongst celebrations from Kami, Anin, and Bardock, who follow the Oni sent to guide them to the start of the road. While when they arrive, Kami says his farewells to go and relay the good news. When he's given leave to run Snake Way, Bardock prepares to go all out and fly to the end immediately, as by Yama's admission, the trip would only take him a little less than half a day. But Anin grabs him by the tail and insists that the running is part of the training. It's a challenge of the willpower and constitution of the mind, rather than just the strength and endurance of the body, one which he's looked forward to for a long time. It's truly an obstacle of mythic proportion. However, the Scarred Saiyan says they don't necessarily have time for that, as they've only got a year to get ready for some payback of mythic proportion, so they're gonna have to speed through without much time for admiring the scenery. Thus, against her will, the Queen of Fire and Mountain is hefted up into a piggyback, as the Saiyan begins dashing down the winding road at his top speed on foot, ignoring Anin's protest that this is still technically cheating, and that he better not get any ideas, and watch where he puts his hands, as she's heard how he is from Musli and Gine. Two accounts on his part the warrior assumes are greatly exaggerated to opposing ends. Still, this allows them to make incredible time, in which to maximize the effectiveness of their training as a means to an end. It isn't until Bardock finally gets curious about what lies beneath all these fluffy clouds, after a few hours of sprinting, and when Anin admits it's the very hell he died expecting, she has to fervently convince him to keep running, and not leap down there while carrying her. From here, the rest of the trip doesn't take all that long, and isn't all that interesting, other than a short stop off at a palace along the way for a short break, and hijinks Anin insists they avoid. Finally, as they reach the end of Snake Way, there's the arrival at a dwarf planet, which serves as the goal for having crossed the million-mile road. And wasting little time, Bardock and Anin leap onto the small planet, where the Earthling finds herself strained under the intense gravity, while Bardock feels at home, noting only now really how light he always feels on Earth. At first, the duo, or really Bardock, makes the mistake of assuming the monkey Bubbles is the king of this world, but they soon enough cross paths with and meet the real King Kai, subsequently finding themselves with a final challenge to make him laugh in exchange for studying under him. Thankfully, despite being quite the serious person, Bardock has spent enough time in space bars to know how to tell and take a joke, and so has an easier time coming up with them than Goku would, even if the Kaio cites his sense of humor as a good deal darker than his own. In contrast, Anon is rather preserved and polite, and so struggles a bit more, but still passes in the end by using some of the Ox King's jokes. And so King Kai resolves to instruct them in the ways of comedy, something they do have to correct him on, as nevertheless, training to prepare for the looming crisis of the Saiyans and their tree of might begins. With the intermediate tier of fighters comprised mostly of our younger heroes and newbies to the martial arts, we see them doing their best to break beyond limits they're unaware would seem impossible at this point, to even their more experienced or even alien counterparts in other timelines, as the challenge of climbing Korin's tower and chasing him bears much more weight, thanks to the presence of so many to compete with in the process, as well as being co-coached and mentored by the likes of Ox King, Grandpa Gohan, Tao Pai Pai, and Mr. Satan, who can complete both tasks with near masterful effort, and so benefit from the extra time to attempt withstanding their own swigs of the ultra divine water, and some sparring under the cat's watch, a process they will later repeat under Popo's tutelage as well. This means that even if Korin's training is relatively sped through rather quickly, it still produces significant results, which endears the students to his lessons in order to carry them on into the next phases of their training. Korin also serves as a good measuring stick, since if the trainees are unable to make the climb within the time the year passes, then they'll have no business with the battlefield with the Saiyans, something proven when Bulma is unable to make it, but also reasons she can contribute far more by chipping in with the reconstruction of Dr. Rilo's new mech suit, or even the project to majorly advance the Earth space travel technology, using Raditz's safe Saiyan attack pod, just in case they fail and people need to flee the planet. While on the other hand, in light of what happened to her mother, the Ox King rather unsubtly sabotages Chi-Chi's attempts at the climb, to keep her from advancing in her training and fighting, actually having tried this to keep all the ladies out of combat. Meanwhile, training directly under Kami are the Masters, who get along in a way not too dissimilar to the Sons of Bardock, even if a bit mismatched, as Master Shin is rather insistent on proving himself considering he is objectively the weakest of their group, and has so far to catch up, even compared to quote-unquote weak students in his school, but he ultimately possesses a matching sharp wit to Roshi's wisdom, and alongside his talent and potential, the training of Korin wouldn't have taken him as long as the youngsters. While opposed to him, Roshi too, having once thought he'd seen it all, has already been humbled long ago, with the craziness and admitting fun that Bardock's bunch brought to Earth, and so he instead only seeks to grow as much as possible and guide others to do the same, in order to support the efforts of the new generation, as Master Mutaito once did, even if it means confronting demons in the exact same way his mentor did. While in a similar mindset to both Shin and Roshi, Spike feels his power would be most necessary in stopping the incoming evil to the planet, giving him something to prove with the Devil Might Beam technique specifically, which again feels a lot more real to the fighter from hell than his rival with Bruce Chun or Baba's usual petty games. Because of this, his ambition is likely the most influential to the Grand Masters group, as aside from their sparring and training with each other, fighting against perfect copies of themselves made by Mr. Popo, sparring with the students led by the Submasters, and even alien fighters like Muesli, and on occasion, the actual Saiyan pair of Raditz and Nappa, as a part of their own training efforts, even Gine when she does her checkups on the rest of the Z fighters. But the greatest impact comes when Spike encourages them to try training his and Baba's style, as all their talk about this Mutaito figure makes even he interested to face the legendary fighter. This is at first a very hard sell, since Roshi is certain his sister will rub his needing her help in his face, and is going to want to call in favors, while Shin wants nothing to do with the family of his rival. But upon sensing that the duo's commitment to set aside their petty rivalries for the greater good is slipping, Devilman flamboyantly asks if that's evil he senses in their hearts, and the trio off to the witch's palace in a jiffy the next instant, with Shin even being kind enough to give his old buddy a piggyback ride on the way. Finally, with the fighters who are best described as at the even further beyond Grandmaster level due to their potential, we have mostly the alien characters doing specialized training of their own. Bardock and Anon's time in the other world is the prime example, as once set to work under King Kai, they focus on strengthening themselves and learning his techniques, which also entails getting to know a new and pretty fun master and mentor for Bardock, as I feel the two would get along great, especially with how much progress as a person Bardock has already made, while the Saiyan specifically carries a few extra goals, obtaining even more power from the spirit of the Saiyans if possible, and sneaking his way down to hell to check it out, as he simply can't pass up the opportunity. Unfortunately for this latter ambition, Anon is not the only one to forbid this terrible idea, as King Kai, Bubbles, and even the smart-ass Bug Gregory do their best to keep an eye on Bardock, and stop him from any hasty decisions. As for the thing with the spirit of the Saiyans, it in and of itself presents issues in two separate denials. Firstly, when he learns of this cool KO whatever technique from the Cricket-like god, Bardock is instantly interested in the idea of stacking with Saiyan power. But apparently, it's not such a good idea to try to mix and balance power and techniques of the divine realm with those from the earthly realm, as the result could be something corrupted in a way. And as for drawing more power out of the spirit of the Saiyans alone, well, that mysterious voice from earlier was the one to say something about that. Through taking up the act of meditation, Kami, Monaito, and Popo encouraged him to in his downtime of working with these metaphysical powers. He eventually finds himself hearing it again, and when focusing on it solely, he suddenly finds himself face to face with the Oozaru within him, where the beast once again ferociously rebels against his attempts to borrow true power without giving himself fully over to it. Instead, he tries to war with himself and his true nature, unwilling to recognize that even though they are one, they are also two separate halves. Thus, the Oozaru is the part of Bardock that longs to roam free and crush his enemies. In rebuttal to this, as Bardock has heard from enough people that he isn't sane enough, and so refuses to hear it from himself, he literally fights against this massive mental image of what he once viewed as the greatest version of himself, stating that he isn't at war with anything while lashing out at the Oozaru to show that he will not be beholden to it. He's completely accepted what and who he was then, and what and who he is now. He just knows this true power, as the ape calls it, could be used for a whole lot more than just crushing the weak. In response, the Oozaru growls slowly, but after a long mental battle, finally reverts to a base form, but one clad in Saiyan armor still, as it holds up 3 fingers and a glare, clarifying for the dense warrior that 3/4 of an Oozaru's power is all he can get if he refuses to give in to his inner animal and destructive tendencies. And while in a technically base form still, even that is too much to maintain beyond a single all-out attack. Half the power of an Oozaru is the best he can hope for if he really wants a new bootleg form. Clicking his teeth angrily, Bardock accepts this, as it's certainly better than he can muster with the technique before, without knowing the newly established rules for it, even if he suspects he might be able to take this Kaioken thing way further than that. However, this too is something King Kai expressly forbids, only further stoking Bardock's rebel spirit. Eventually, as he makes fast enough progress, has begun horning in on King Kai's teaching of Anin to speed her along into being a Kaioken and power sparring partner, the Kai begins plotting to throw Bardock a bone by giving him the taste of hell he wanted so bad. Meanwhile, with Gine, her specialized training is something familiar, a long stint of wilderness survival training, much like she put Goku through. However, she's doing so in far harsher environments by trotting the globe as she works, and thus communing with nature in the process, as it's almost all slowly and cruelly killed off by the Tree of Might's growth during the year. As a result, the very act of hunting and eating itself is an intense ordeal. It's certainly not all darkness and despair out in the world though, as there is good to do, like stopping and setting right a strange shape-shifting pig, and a greedy yet ambitious samurai, the former of which she has to really resist the urge to make into emergency bacon, whilst food is so scarce, while nearly as hard on her as serving in Team Bardock once was. This experience also allows for time to focus on understanding and mastering her own spirit of the Saiyans, and more importantly, that hysterical Saiyan lady form she took on during all the chaos, which felt as if all the power of the Oozaru form was summoned forth right then and there in her base form. Not just a portion. It's upon pondering the mystery of this power inside of herself, which seemingly exists only for senseless destruction, alongside the tragedy, inevitability, and unfair or needless death that comes with the act of simply eating and surviving in a world like this, that we find Gine in a similar position to Bardock. After finishing a hard day of training, she dreams of a great ape, which she recognizes as herself surprisingly calm with the Oozaru form. Feeling no need to immediately fight like Bardock, Gine instead chooses diplomacy, and thus seeks an answer to these gloomy rebuttals to her own philosophy, though the great ape's response is merely a low, uninterested roar, as if to confirm Gine's fears that the Oozaru, and thus a part of herself, family, and people, really is just indiscriminate violence and nothing more. But upon seeing the other side of itself react with fear and rejection, the Oozaru angrily roars out at her finally, and Gine, by her nature, roars back, not out of anger, but by simple impulse, a response the beast is satisfied with, as it demonstrates its own point, and thus the feelings in Gine's heart and instincts. Indiscriminate violence, as equally as indiscriminate love, is something all beings are capable of as parts of themselves equally, and because of that, her fury and wrath is her Oozaru's own, and its sadness and joy are her own. There's nothing special or scary about her power, or passed on Bardock's team, or her need to consume other things to survive, and this acceptance and gentle calm found in it grants Gine the rebirth she needs to begin trying to tame this wild power inside her, so it's not so susceptible to the shifting tides of her heart. The morning after, as she begins the familiar process of waking up Oolong and Yajirobe to continue their journey and training further, her impromptu party stumbles across a large and mysterious egg, nestled in the courts of a massive Western-style dragon. This bounty offers a food supply that lasts the group longer than any other they've found so far, and thus Gine is eternally grateful. However, when Yajirobe is insisted on making almonds to go with their dragon steaks, Gine is insisted on protecting the egg, having already dubbed it with the name Delia, or Delia for short, so it's off limits as a part of their group. At the same time, during this juncture of her training, Muesli finds herself depending on others she has never had to, since there's a great deal of returning to basics and rebuilding herself with the setback of losing her sight in exchange for using the power of her second red eye. Not to mention, she's still feeling guilty, so as a result, redefining her her concept of perception is her first step to both getting out of her funk over one tricky loss that nearly doomed her world again, as well as getting stronger in her own right. So this is the last time. It's thanks to people like Kami, whose interesting ability to monitor the whole world without truly seeing it in the traditional sense, which is something he has been trying to impart to Minato, who also helps with lessons on focus with the sense of hearing that aid the most in that sense of redefinition, establishing it as one of her strongest senses, and returning a great deal of Muzi's confidence in her physical senses other than sight. Even if she can't smell as well as a Saiyan, maybe she hasn't lost anything. At the same time, while easing her through her initial superstitions, her own baby boy becomes the greatest teacher she could hope for, in readjusting and preparing to use her new forbidden power more consistently, as he's already been through this process and closed in on mastering it more than any other Cerulean to date most likely. Granolah has also learned concepts like image training and meditation in his time on Earth, which also greatly help Muzi out now, especially since it's rather effortless to envision things vividly in this state, and allows her to train however she can think of, and serves as proper time for taking stock and care of the mind, which becomes vital to processing some of the painful feelings someone with Bardock's face putting her home in danger dredges up, and all after finally telling the idiot she was in love with him, and doing whatever. The point is, her training bears fruit for lack of a better term, yielding increased power and an even greater spatial awareness and reaction speed than Granolah achieved, and that was while he used his weighted blindfold, past the point of even needing it, as she begins to try and balance these techniques and lessons with those she's gotten in the past, along with key sets to compensate and keep her own training as intense as possible for as long as possible. It feels like something new, or maybe something innate, opens up to her, as she begins to almost close in on a sense she could only describe as a foresight which doesn't require eyes, like that which Granolah mentioned is possible with their forbidden red ones, something which is now sorely needed, since even when it comes to making use of our new contract with Gas, she is welcoming of how brutal and unforgiving the Heater is in training, his orders having of course been to facilitate the improvement of the last surviving Ceruleans as bounty hunters, and by his own standards at that. So as deplorable as he may seem, he is arguably the best instructor in preparing for the cruel savagery of Turles, available to our heroes, one she's taking full advantage of without any excuses or holding back. Speaking of, Granolah is unequivocally the one who bothers Gas to fulfill his training contract the most, and it does benefit Gas as well, as it's not as if his disdain for Granolah is completely gone, nor the adolescent Cerulean's grudge towards he and the rest of the Heaters, which was once incorrectly aimed at the now dead Bardock, another frustration the Crane School sniper takes out in his training. In this way, he gets to wail on and shoot at Gas, without fear of dying for the act of doing so, even though it still really hurts when his new teacher and sparring partner only holds back as much as necessary to avoid killing or maiming badly enough that consuming food and sleeping won't fix it the next day. And since the boy has rather insisted on staying close to the base of the tree of might with Gas at all times, if not just to keep his eyes on him despite being swollen and bruised, the two spend a great deal of their time over the course of the next year focused on training with extreme intensity, and where Granolah is usually all for nearly inhumane training in pursuit of his goals, Gas is truly an unyielding master unlike any he's ever faced, partially because the young Heater has little experience teaching without Elic's oversight, and tendency to rein him in when getting too excited, requiring he get more self-expressive and even creative. It becomes evident that he begins to have fun through doing stuff like tracking and mauling the Cerulean brat through jungles and cities, so he better knows what it's like to be prey, which if he can cram into his little brain will bring him all the closer to being an apex predator like Hunter. Activities and drills far more cruel, petty, and grueling than Granolah could have ever thought up by himself in the forest of Planet Cereal, back when he was doing his best to prepare himself for revenge, and desperately wishing for some form of assistance. At that point, even himself having given serious thought to Elic's offers. Gas is also somehow more stoic and closed off than Bardock could ever be, and far more self-interested and confident in his own overwhelming power than he would have ever met Tao Pai Pai to be. But with each day that he struggles under Gas's intensely heated bounty hunter training, Granolah can feel himself making greater strides than he ever has been able to before, almost like his own scope and self-awareness of his weakness and other strengths increased drastically, like one of those boosts received by Saiyans. But surely something like that can't be possible. The answer has to lie in all the factors he's undergone, like that weird water the talking cat that makes the magic beans gave him, which was meant to awaken his potential as one of the worthy defenders of the earth. Beyond that, training with his mom as she's made her own strides and truly began to master and make the Cerulean Guard's fighting style her own, has caused a chemical reaction in both their evolutions that have at this point already far deferred from any other Cerulean in history, as Granolah has resolved to gain complete control over his forbidden red eye and help Muzi to do the same. And as the final ingredient to this reaction, there is the monster that is Gas, who can only be described as a creature, which puts Granolah's former nightmares of Uzaru to shame. This is because eventually there's a slight change in the Heater, but one someone as perceptive as Granolah notices. Slowly over time, after the Heaters have gotten all the info they want of the Ceruleans about what, how, and why the Dragon Balls work, and are therefore used, Gas throws himself even more fervently into his contract, almost as if he is finally treating it as training of his own, as by the time half a year has passed, and Granolah along with Muzi has begun to show at least some talent in Gas's eyes, he deems them capable of moving on from warm-up training into real until super survival training, as from there, it isn't rare at all for Gas to force the young sniper into spars against his unleashed form, something Elic is deeply disapproving of, as constantly flaunting all that power is a big risk to draw someone's notice. But Granolah and Muesli are actually all for it, even if intimidated at first, as due to being observant himself, it also becomes clear that Gas is beginning to slowly temper that uncontrollable power. And through doing things like copying their meditation and image training, he keeps inching closer and closer to that goal, as the Cerealians can also sense his base power itself growing from this, and in more ways than one, as over time, his demeanor changes even more. Or rather, to Granolah, he notes that it's matured some, in a way he suspects is due to figures like Turles and Vegeta. This tentative connection and mutual benefit thankfully solidifies the truce with Gas, so that after long enough of technically working together, he and Granolah aren't infuriated by each other's burning and piercing gazes anymore, and don't try any backstabbing, in a true respect built up for one another and their contract. Meanwhile, Raditz has also put through a similarly harsh experience at the hands of a former, or still standing enemy, but at least for him it's something he technically is, or at least at one point was getting used to, making his training at least something he can take to a familiarity. To put it bluntly, Nappa is the model of a near-perfect Saiyan warrior. His attitude, mindset, power, and the way he used them all are meant to bring as much pride to the Saiyan race as a whole as they are to he himself. It's part of why the man could be so jar-headed. He truly lives and breathes for the fight, so much he sometimes purposely blocks out his own thoughts, emotions, or pain. The exact opposite of lessons Raditz has been taught as of late, but ones which he has still come to value, not just because they vibe with his natural bravado, even if he couldn't back it up in the past, but also because Saiyans like Vegeta, his uncle, and his father have grown so strong by going to even greater lengths to uphold their pride than he's ever considered, well, sane. But at the same time, showing a bit of that insanity through his grit and tenacity were what finally endeared Nappa to Raditz, in a clear way, making him the absolute best mentor he could hope for now, to the point that now as the big guy tortures him with tail exercises, it's clear to Raditz he is making an actual attempt to give him an even greater iron constitution with his weakness than even the prince of all remaining Saiyans possesses, this being the only reason Raditz eventually stops trying to avoid that part of the training specifically. What's more, Nappa's big, bold brawler style and techniques also vibe and fit well in with Raditz's arsenal, both his Devil School Dynamite martial arts and his weekday and game themed series of named Ki blasts, while in turn, Nappa, like Raditz once did, takes a keen interest in discipline and practice martial arts, as seeing Raditz think on, adapt, and even improve from time to time his personal style on the fly begins to stoke more and more confidence and awe in Raditz's skill and merit from Nappa, especially since instead of making fun of how stupid Nappa is now, Raditz often takes pride in showing off and teaching to display how big-brained he is, which helps Nappa to grow and develop as well, and disproves the adage of old Saiyans and new tricks, eventually leaving Nappa in a confused stupor as he struggles to figure out and remember why he missed so much obvious potential in the eldest son of Bardock. It's now abundantly clear he has a sharp mind that excels in strategy and trickery, exemplified by moments like the boys' idea to use a tape recording of Nappa snoring, so that they don't have to take breaks in their training, just for the sake of keeping up appearances with the scouter. Seeing Nappa's opinion on the low-class run improve drastically, to the point of his beginning to view Raditz as less cowardly, and more idiotically courageous, less runty and more scrappy, less upstart, and more uniquely ambitious, less annoying, and more, well no, they still annoy each other a good bit, since Raditz, despite trying to be tough as nails, is still soft in the bald Saiyan's opinion, while the hairy Saiyan is well aware that Nappa is attempting to turn him into his new Vegeta, uncorrupted by a rival master. But that's more a helpful delusion that he loses nothing by letting Nappa believe, even if he'll do everything in his power to prevent that at all cost, despite feeling his own grudge against the bully loosen more and more, as the former general really gives his all, in preparing Raditz for a rematch with Prince Vegeta, requiring that Nappa generally teach the low-class brats all the best tricks of higher-class Saiyans that he can the time allotted, including how to properly control the Uzaru form, and even to create the Power Ball itself, thanks to Turles also being a master practitioner he's observed over the years in this timeline. However, even in light of this change in Nappa, there's no way Raditz would ever be friends with this dunce. After all, he doesn't need any more lame-o loser masters than he already has. As for Goku and King Piccolo, their training arguably goes the most smoothly, since throughout building their friendship through experiences like capture at the hands of Garlic, these two warriors who in any other timeline would be bitterly sworn enemies, have evolved in fair ways in their own right already. As it is, after all, that very unknowingly ironic bond timeline-wise, in tandem with their new one as a budding master-disciple, with a shared ambition to get much stronger than they've ever imagined before, which has created this incredible combination. The claims of those like Monito and Bardock himself that they could unlock a super fearsome power by just embracing some part of themselves that they've always subconsciously denied, contrasting to those of the likes of Kami and Vegeta, that regardless of how much effort and work they put in, they can still only atone for and amount to little compared to the greatest of their peoples, which has greatly inspired them even more than they truly know, almost like a divinely demonic ambition of their own has been awoken. hence Kakarot's attempts to train in a more disciplined mindset of a Saiyan soldier, despite how foreign it feels to him, while Piccolo Daima is forced to extend and balance the benevolence and affection he has developed for Son Goku of the Earth, with a firm guiding hand and an iron fist in setting the intensity of their training, since he is depending on his technical student for his own growth, just as much as he is being depended on for the next year. Thus, alongside the transition into their training together, as the founding of the Demon Clan's true school of martial arts, things are going so relatively well that the two are arguably training just as, if not more ferociously than even what Gas and Nappa are capable of putting the other boys through in some regards, as it's truly full throttle training through day and night for the two of them, with little to no concept for breaks. This is because the daytime is devoted to guerrilla-style survival training and hardcore sparring matches, that often end with both featuring swollen eyes and a smattering of bruises, while the evenings and nighttime consist of more meditation and image training than a Goku this young is necessarily ready for, or rather excited for or interested in, but it proves simply too useful as a means of being productive and focused while they do rest. But this insistence on mindfulness and discipline for Goku from Piccolo is two-pronged, however, as he too seeks to bring out the power of the Saiyans, which Bardock's family has done such a good job so far of restraining. Hence his initial course of action being to leave the moon intact for a year, until destroying it to remove it as an option for the Saiyans at the last moment, allowing them to maximize its use for themselves. According to Raditz, high-level Saiyans can make their own miniature moons anyway, but that option at least drains away a significant portion of their energy, which they therefore can weaponize or defend with after transforming, so even that disadvantage of the enemy would help greatly. Besides, knowing Bardock and his brood, he may have the Powerball ability himself. Thus King Piccolo's true focus for increasing his own power is Uzaru Goku, who he takes special care in ensuring he gets a chance to fight, face, and subsequently be nearly trounced by every month, as his training to quell and subdue the Pharaoh Saiyan in that state is always rough, thanks to the fact that Son Goku seems to have absolutely no aptitude for controlling himself as a great ape, in contrast to the general knack he has for the spirit of the Saiyan technique his family has seemingly pioneered. And since this monthly training is a bit more wildly chaotic and noticeable than the transformation training the other alien fighters of Earth are undergoing throughout the year, these Uzaru soirees serve as the perfect rendezvous date for Gine's check-ins, since she is almost the only credible source King Piccolo can turn to for first-hand knowledge on Saiyan power. Also just kind of parenting, since there's a good bit of that he has to do as well. However, as she always wants to do when around her youngest boy, Gine also serves as a valuable voice of reason to slow he and Piccolo down and allow themselves proper rest and recovery periods, bolstered by the time in which she is able to bring her new companions around to meet them. And then after they've joined in on the training with the Z-Fighters, there is also the distraction of Dedelia's egg hatching, as Son Goku, no matter how serious he tries to be in this horrible situation, he simply can't not be happy about his family now having a pet, as he instantly forms a special bond with the orphan dragoness, even though Delia is still very much Gine's skill baby first and foremost, as she's the first thing she sees upon hatching. At the same time, Piccolo begins to feel like a nagging housewife, as he has to institute a no pets policy in his demon school training from here on, whilst watching Kakarot in real time lose a great deal of the discipline he'd been cultivating over the year, all to choreograph and plan an entire song and dance with the little dragon, one which he whistles in an annoyingly headache-inducing tone. As should be obvious, evidenced by the introduction of a family pet bearing the name of the mother of Icarus, it's time next of course for yet another movie boss to come knocking, since this is also simply the most logical time for the next one to take place. Again, even if it too is a bit early, and will require some downscaling to fit into our narrative. And even if for our characters, another issue to deal with now of all times is the worst possible thing, and might I add, a bit unfair to them, in the interest of punishing them for being too strong in the verse almost, as major threats coinciding and compounding is a hurdle that even the canon Z-Fighters have seldom faced. In this continuity, the Lord Slug film takes place 8 to 9 months after Turles' initial invasion, around the final phase of the Tree of Might's gestation period, and just when the Earth is near its breaking point, as resources become scarcer and more people are congregated to the cities to survive. Dr. Breeze, as a result, doesn't really have the luxury of using a giant telescope to see a mid-sized planet hurtling towards Earth, but Kami and King Kai can very obviously notice themselves to inform everyone, and if not them, then Muesli. When it becomes time to go and try to deflect the planet, as signs of life are sensed on it, Gine and Muesli are the duo to step up, deciding to lead the adult fighters capable of the flight and key control required in a combined effort, thanks to our Saiyan saga being recognizable, but a bit different than we're used to, like Raditz not killing anyone but Goku. Turles and his underlings technically only killed Bardock. We did lose Xanon, but that is simultaneously not Turles' fault, and at the same time definitely his fault, for sending a Crash out to deliver a message, which is overall Elec's fault for agreeing to the wishes of a Crash out to even let Gas go with Turles. Besides, the planet hurtling towards them seems vaguely familiar to Gas. The group prepare to sync up their blast when they're joined by a surprised helper, as since it's in his best interest to do so, Nappa has arrived to help defend the near mature Tree of Might, and by proxy, the planet is feeding off of, adding a Bomber DX to the mix, and showing off some of the slight key sense control he's begun to develop over the last year. Unlike in the original film, this is more than enough to completely divert the planet's course, though there is still some notable damage, due to there being nearly too much power to control, even distributed amongst so many. As a result, the group isn't as badly incapacitated, but a strange, sturdy fortress-like space station ship still barrels its way towards the outskirts of West City. As they weren't allowed to accompany the adults, many of the younger Z fighters are quicker to make their way to the area to investigate, chiefly Goku, who begins to help and fight back as a group of white-clad soldiers disembark and claim the planet under the control of Lord Slug. This quickly devolves into an all-out fight when they go on the attack, and even after being powered down a bit from the original movie, these guys are all easily overwhelmed. The elderly Lord Slug would then make a short appearance to inspire his troops and curve back the odds a bit, possibly when he senses the inactive stone in Goku's possession, which is truly the 4-star Dragon Ball, as he has also refused to let it leave his sight since Bardock's death. At the same time, arriving to help along with many other familiar faces, Granolah and Raditz notice the old green man was strangely scarfing down pills, and for a moment, ponder if it's alright to beat up on someone with health and addiction issues. Meanwhile, back inside the ship, thanks to the Dragon Balls being inert, Lord Slug is much more interested in the Tree of Might instead, and so discreetly while his troops are fighting, makes his way to it, alongside Commander Zune. The underling he'd in the original film killed before the battle began. Here though, because Gas stayed back in order to protect the tree itself just in case, the Heater winds up being the one to kill the poor horned alien here, but then while trying not to rely solely on his unleashed form for power, but rather on the strength and control he has gained while training with Granolah, even if it only seems to pester the old space-traveling warrior. And so even with full unleashed power and technique put in moves like his heat wave, Gas is unable to stop Slug from investigating and then subsequently stealing a small portion of the parasitic tree's life force by simply placing a hand on it to better sense his energy, restoring his youth in the process, and making him intelligible finally by the way. Quickly left in a desperate situation as the power gap widens, this threat to the Tree of Might endangers the planet it's in the middle of growing on, and threatens to incur the wrath of both Turles and Elic. Seeing the youngest Heater forced to think pragmatically, and so reluctantly resorts to calling Elic, as well as Turles, who negotiate with Slug themselves. Since after all, the mission Gas was on before joining Turles was seeking out and establishing a diplomatic and profitable connection with the self-proclaimed king of the universe, in order to bring him into the Heater's fold and bolster their coup even further with yet another alliance. As a result, Elic, Turles, and Slug exchange a few words over communicator, with the latter two somewhat paradoxically coming to respect one another, and so flippantly on their own, they make an agreement that if Slug succeeds, he's free to take the fruit and make a new planet cruiser out of Earth. But eventually, Turles will come to collect what he's owed, a prospect the evil super-namekian looked forward to. Meanwhile, back at the ship, as chaos ramps up, King Piccolo arrives to help Goku and ends up taking on the winged slug soldier Wing, summarily brutalizing him, a bit rougher than Junior would in the original film. And then when Wing pleads for him to join them as a fellow demon clansman, however, Piccolo doesn't even hear him out, feeling as if he's already found his real clan, even if he's unwilling to say it out loud. Meanwhile, Goku in place of Gohan doesn't really get overwhelmed by the miniature energy-sapping clone-producing fighter Metamacha, seeing them both come together and team up to easily and quickly do away with the quote-unquote pretty one Angela, as Goku has more than enough strength to deal with his mini-me's, and what's more, they receive even more backup when Goku's brothers bring more fighters to the scrap, all prepared for battle and attest to the fruits of their training so far, or even simply looking for something to take their anger out on, since living on the Earth itself has become a stressful act the last years, has been slowly killed, and many Slug and his forces are uniquely more unwelcome than they would usually be. This also means Slug's forces are wiped out pretty quickly, way before he takes down the deserters, who try to flee when he returns. As he demonstrates what he's regained with his youth though, his power is too overwhelming for the grand majority of fighters, bringing the Z-Warriors down ultimately to the trio of Gine, Goku, and King Piccolo, who are forced to break through their limits a final time, if they even want to make it to the real test of the rematch against the Saiyan Crusher Corps Heater alliance, that is. As the battle rages on, and it's revealed that he is not only a Namekian, but something known as a super-Namekian, with evil naturally found in his heart, Slug continues to present an impenetrable wall that stands immensely tall, especially once he grows gigantic and drives our heroes further into a corner, seeing things begin to look so dire for the Earth that even in Otherworld, Bardock has interrupted his training and is nearly about to squish King Kai with how worldly insistent he is on the god to give him the play-by-play. And when this only makes his worry grow more, Bardock speaks to Gine through King Kai, encouraging her to try something he's learned while dead, sensing and drawing in the Genki of all living creatures on Earth. Gine at first isn't so sure this will work, as she has to learn secondhand, and she is sad to inform her mate that there aren't many animals left. But somehow, through this, and despite feeling a bit anticlimactic, something comes in response to the need the Mother Saiyan has to protect the Earth and its creatures, even while it's dying. And because of this, for but a mere moment, Gine somehow accesses a power beyond her hysterical form, something which seems like she is almost not meant to have it now, something which can only be falsely assumed as the legendary power of the Super Saiyan. However, even with this dangerous power allowing her to overwhelm Slug temporarily, Gine is downed again and left out of energy as her body rejects this form she's forced herself in, which causes her to consider Bardock's final gamble as a true last resort. Still, the light she has shown in this darkness is far from insignificant, as it's this new forbidden power of her own, combined with Piccolo and Goku giving her over the rest of their energy, which wins the day, even as Piccolo daima ends up in the other evil Namekian's giant crushing grasp. However, with an evil plan of his own, the Demon King calls out to a nearly unconscious Goku to whistle that damn song again, tearing his own ear ears off to drown out that blasted noise, which must really feel agonizing on enlarged eardrums, as it ends up stunning Slug enough to let them go, while fighters who had been formerly incapacitated from the effort to stop the planet cruiser and Slug's forces rally as well, and begin pelting the massive green man with attacks and ki blasts from afar, which pester, distract, and impede him, even if they do little damage. It regardless all buys the time necessary for Gine to climb back to her feet, amongst the encouraging yells of Muesli, Kakarot, Raditz, Granolah, and the others. With this one-time vulnerability made, and enough energy imparted into her for a final all-out attack, Lord Slug is critically wounded by a penetrating Guzaru punch, bearing the form of Piccolo and Goku in it as well. As with the force of it, Gine sends Slug crashing into his own fortress ship. However, here in this timeline, also unlike in the original movie 4, Slug realizes he's still outmanned and outgunned, and by now, he's resolved to cut his losses. So using his telekinesis and his geoforming mothership, he condenses all of his destroyed belongings into a new miniature planet cruiser for one, and escapes Earth. The film then technically ends with the same joke, of Piccolo regrowing his ears, while at the same time from inside his emergency escape pod, we see Slug slowly fading from consciousness, as he's contemplating where he should go next, the conclusion seeming obvious, but also revealing to him his own fear to return to planet Namek after the cataclysm. But what are the choices you really have now? Meanwhile, elsewhere in space, Vegeta continues attempts to help Turles out of a seeming funk his master has fallen in, as not only does it seem like he now avoids sleep at all costs, and as a result, it's far less jovial and fun, but he's not even willing to celebrate all their successes as of late, like that interesting little discovery they made on that bug planet Arlia, or the fact that since their trip to Earth, Master Turles has begun developing a budding ability to sense and suppress his ki naturally, like those Earthlings did, a lesson Vegeta is insisting on learning himself, since he didn't get to see it showcased firsthand much on Earth. After this, the last 3 months of the year are spent recuperating from the prior fight, which becomes sorely needed for the likes of those like Gine, who are incapacitated by their wounds to the point that she doesn't get the chance to investigate that glowing golden power she used, as doing so in the first place left her body in pretty rough shape. So the rest of their time is spent polishing up on and finishing out training bolstered with the experience of the most recent world-threatening battle, and doing the best they can to help the declining Earth, as the imminent day of the Saiyans, Turles and Vegeta's return looms closer. Though as they do, the Dragon Balls have reactivated, and that's where we'll be leaving this story off for right now.